You know what makes this generation the worst? Because we live in a world of fucking pussies who don't want to do this again. But that's been the sentiment of this console generation thus far. The fact that it's lame. Well, we're like halfway through these consoles' lifespans and it doesn't even feel like they're like a year old at this point. Sure, we've gotten games, but it kind of feels like we would have gotten like all of these games within like 1 to 2 years back on the Xbox 360 or the PS4. Well, not necessarily. I do feel like people kind of look back at previous generations thinking they were like a lot better than they really were. Particularly the 8th generation with the PS4 and Xbox One. A lot of people look back at the PS4 generation and they're like, oh my god, look at all the games that came out compared to the PS5. Wow, why is the PS5 floundering? Buddy, do you remember the PS4 generation? Specifically like the first half of it. There were crumbs. I'd argue we barely got anything until like Uncharted 4 and Ratchet & Clank hit in 2016. And even then, those are pretty much it for that year. The first half of the PS4 was like, knack. Infamous Second Son was great. I love Infamous Second Son. But other than that, you know, like Little Big Planet 3, which that was a cross-gen game. That was on PS3 as well, which, you know, that's kind of a big problem with the PS5, so, you know, we'll get to that. But then you got stuff like The Order 1886, which is like a fine game, but the whole problem with that is that it was like, what, like 20 minutes long? And then a ton of remasters, which, to be fair, the PS4 wasn't backwards compatible, so, you know, these remasters were a lot more lucrative than they seemed at the time. Like God of War 3 Remastered, when that was announced, like, I was genuinely kind of fucking upset. Like, it's like, why are we doing God of War 3 Remastered when on the PS3 you've got, like, the God of War saga, which included, like, all the games up to that point? But something like the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection, I think, was incredibly lucrative. That was how I played those 3 games. I went back to back to back on all 3 of them. And when you compare the Nathan Drake collection to the original releases on PS3, especially nowadays, it's incredibly obvious just how much a lot of games from the PS3 generation really needed just that extra little polish. It's like Uncharted games on the PS3 like stutter, they have so many little frame dips, they feel like sluggish in comparison to the PS4 releases. I think most notably you had The Last of Us Remastered on PS4, which, guess what, launched a year after the PS3 version. Yeah, remastered. Like, what a joke. Yes, it's remastered, but it's just like, it's a year old, man. Remastered feels like it applies to games that are like, whatever, like, almost a decade at least. But nowadays, PlayStation's getting a ton of criticism for remastering Horizon Zero Dawn, which people are claiming like, oh my god, why are they remastering this? It's not even a decade old. Which, yes, I do have the same sentiment, but to be fair, they've done this with far newer titles. The difference is, PS3 games were not compatible on the PS4, and they also kind of needed that extra little bump when it came to like, oh, a smooth frame rate, a higher resolution, you know, like that's nice. Pretty much all the PS4 games they're remastering for PS5 don't really need that. On top of the fact you can already play them on PS5, so, you know, I digress. There's all kinds of things we can talk about here. Let me just go between both of these consoles, because I haven't talked about this fucking dope. I just want to talk about my experiences thus far with the consoles of the 9th generation. Pretty much halfway through their lifespans. Let's start with the PS5, because, you know, there's actually something to say about this thing. Because like I was saying, when you compare the PS5 to the PS4, I don't necessarily feel like the PS5 is, like, in quotes, as bad as it seems. I mean, especially considering, you know, we're in the first half of this console's generation. So, you know, comparing the first half of this to the PS4, like, we've gotten a fair amount of stuff. The problem is, it's just not super exciting when you look back at it all. Why isn't it exciting? Okay, well, a few things. One, a lot of the PS5 games that Sony has specifically put out, you know, like the first party big releases, were also available on PS4. And I've seen many developers in like interviews say stuff along the lines of like, hey, no, the PS4 version of something like Horizon Forbidden West, that didn't hold us back at all on the PS5 version. I disagree with that. Of course, that's coming from somebody who is not a game designer at all. But I just feel like it's ridiculous to say that. I just feel like that's marketing speak, you know? They know that people are looking at the PS4 version, they're going like, oh great, the PS5 version is just gonna be like a prettier PS4 game. It's not gonna be like from the ground up a PS5 game, which yeah, that's how most of those games kind of feel, you know? Doesn't take away from how good of games they are, you know, stuff like Spider-Man Miles Morales, Sackboy, A Big Adventure, Gran Turismo 7, Horizon, God of War Ragnarok. They're all great games. You know, just the fact that there's a PS4 version of them out there, I don't really think makes them any less great. I think when it comes to them being just like PS5 games through and through, it does feel like, you know, hey, like what could have been if you didn't have to worry about a PS4 version, but I don't think it really affects the quality of the overall game that much. You know, they're still wonderful games, and I experienced them all on PS5, and I think PS5 is the definitive console to play them on. Keyword being console. Because yeah, not only are these games available on PS4, but many of them are also available on PC, because that's something Sony's doing right now. You know, you have the PlayStation exclusive games on PlayStation consoles, but they're also doing PC releases a little later down the line, which I think makes a lot of sense business-wise, because, you know, let's be honest here. I think at this point, if you're a PC gamer, you're a PC gamer. If you're a console gamer, you're a console gamer. Yes, you're missing out on potential sales of people who primarily play on PC that just desperately want Days Gone. They're like, oh my god, I have to buy a PlayStation. Like, no, you can just wait on your PC, and these games will eventually come to PC. I think each side wins in that scenario, you know, like these are PlayStation games. Obviously, they're gonna come to PlayStation first, but, you know, if you're on PC and you really want to play some of these games, you know, you don't have to spend money on a console that you're just not gonna use other than for, like, a couple of games here and there. Now, the way Sony is doing it is kind of dog shit. But regardless, what I'm trying to say there is, just overall, like, all of this, like, exclusivity kind of stuff where like, oh, like we don't have a ton of like super true PS5 exclusives that are like, these are only available on PS5, they'll only work on PS5, whether that means they're also releasing on PS4 or they get a PC release later down the line. Regardless, that does kind of bring excitement down a little bit, even if it doesn't really matter all too much. And that's not even mentioning the games themselves. You know, during the PS4 generation, a lot of companies kind of did a lot of like remasters and re-releases to kind of fill in the gaps between their big new releases. Like I said, Sony had Last of Us remastered, God of War 3 remastered, Uncharted, and they're doing the exact same thing with the PS5 generation, except they're choosing the worst fucking games to do that with. Man, I just don't care about like any of the ones they're doing these days. I mean, first up, The Last of Us Part 1. This is a from the ground up remake of The Last of Us. Boo. It's just pretty pointless. I mean, when you do a side-by-side comparison, you're like, okay, like, yeah, I can see the difference. It looks a little nicer, but the original looks perfectly fine. Who knows? Maybe this is like one of those things where like, hey, during the PS4 generation, when I looked at the remastered PS4 game compared to the PS3 game, PS3 still looked good at that time. Nowadays, oh mama, I can tell a difference between a PS4 game and a PS3 game. So maybe in like a decade or something, Last of Us Part 1 on PS5 will look like, oh my god, I can't imagine them just not doing this remake. But as it stands, man, this just felt like a complete waste of resources. And it kind of just goes with like a weird strategy Sony has. I mean, it's not really weird, but it just feels like a complete waste. Where like they're really focusing on a lot of like movies and TV show adaptations. You know, The Last of Us on HBO did really well. So, you know, to kind of like keep up with the hype of that, they put out The Last of Us Part 1 on PS5. To keep up with the hype of the Uncharted movie releasing, they put out the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection. To keep up with Until Dawn's movie, they put out the Until Dawn remake, which was also completely pointless. Oh, Horizon's getting a TV show. Oh my god, we gotta put out Horizon Remastered on PS5. You know, like, it's just the same franchises over and over that they just keep on regurgitating out. You know, these franchises that are kind of like one and done. There's not much more you can do with them outside of like new games that might take like 5 years to come out. They don't have much to pull from the well other than just, oh, okay, well, we haven't remastered the first game, even though like it doesn't need it. The Uncharted series is practically finished, so it's like, okay, well, let's just give like Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy just kind of like an upgrade, a very slight upgrade. Because, oh my god, we need goddamn something releasing alongside the movie. And, you know, you have stuff like Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut, Death Stranding Director's Cut, you know, and they're fine, you know, like I don't really remember Sony like really pushing these all too much. It doesn't feel like a huge waste considering like they kind of came out very close to their PS4 releases. So it's kind of just like, hey, you know, know, if you missed out on Ghost of Tsushima, you know, hey, we're doing just like a little director's cut definitive edition. And, oh yeah, it's also releasing on PS5. Like, that's fine. That's whatever. Stuff like this, it just feels like a waste of time. You know, like, I understand the value of it. You know, like I said, maybe in 10 years, I'll look at these releases and just be like, well, damn, I can't imagine playing these games any other way. But as it stands, it feels like Sony has whittled down their franchises that they want to support and use to the point that, like, these are pretty much the only things we ever see from them. Pretty much feels like all Sony wants to release is The Last of Us, God of War, and Horizon over and over and over again. Which is kind of my third point for, like, why the games that Sony's been releasing just have not really been that exciting. You know, these are all amazing games right here, but a lot of it just kind of feels like, you know, we're just kind of getting like PS 4.5 rather than like, oh man, this is a new generation of PlayStation. God of War Ragnarok is fantastic. Horizon Forbidden West is fantastic. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, it's a Ratchet & Clank game. I love Ratchet & Clank games, but man, when you play one, you practically played all of them. But hey, then we had Spider-Man 2, which was like, that was like the only game that Sony released in 2023 pretty much. And this game is fantastic. It's also quite literally more of the same. That's just kind of my problem with all of these games. They genuinely do feel like more of the same, which is perfectly fine because they're all like sequels. You know, I expect them to play and look very similarly to the first games. But man, when we have to wait like so long for these games and then they come out and I'm playing Spider-Man 2 and I'm just like, yeah, this is exactly what I was expecting. Like, if I walked in on somebody playing this game, I wouldn't necessarily think, oh man, are you playing Spider-Man 2? I would think, which of the 3 Spider-Man games is this guy playing? So I gotta be honest, like, I played like 5 hours of Spider-Man 2. I really enjoyed my time with it, but I've kind of like fell off of it. I'll get back to it eventually. Same with all 3 of these games, actually. You know, I did get through Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart because, you know, I'm one of those brain-dead, colorful platformer goons. But overall, the problem I've had with Sony's lineup this generation is that it is unbelievably safe. They're not willing to take, like, any risks on basically anything other than fucking live service games. Like, it's been shown that, like, Sony has, like, 10 or so live service games in development just because they're trying to chase that trend in the gaming industry. The fact that you see stuff like Fortnite blowing up, Sony's like, oh, shoot, we need to have a piece of that pie. So end up buying Bungie for, like, $3 billion, and then they get them to tell them, like, what's the secret sauce to live service games? And Bungie's just kind of shrugging their shoulders. They're like, oh, we kind of just fell into this. So they expected a game like Concord to do, like, unbelievably well. Like, this was going to be their next big IP. And then that flounders more than, like, anything in the gaming industry for a while. The fact that you have this game that they shut down within a week is unprecedented. And then you have all these other games that they're trying to push that I'm like, I'm sorry, who cares? Who cares about fair games? I don't see a lot of people caring about Marathon from Bungie. And in my opinion, I'm kind of like, why are you trying to chase all these things when you have things that work right now? Like, Helldivers 2 is a live service game. It is multiplayer, and it did incredibly well. Surprisingly well. I don't think anybody expected this to do as well as it did, but like, here you go. You have a live service multiplayer game that people really clicked with that did incredibly well. And then Sony tried to sabotage that. They tried to shove updates in like people's faces on the PC version of this that like forced them to use like PlayStation Network logins. It's just confusing. I'm like, do you really want a piece of that live service pie? Or you just want to like, I don't know, you just don't know what to do once you actually get something that's a success that's like, oh wow, like this is actually doing what we want to do. Which to be fair, I don't expect just because Helldivers 2 did well that, oh wow, Sony's just not gonna put out all of their other like live service games they've had in development for years. Like, no, obviously, like they kind of wanted to just develop a bunch of them, throw a bunch at the wall, see what sticks, and then just move forward from there. And I think it's a great idea to have at least like 1 or 2 live service games that, you know, keeps going indefinitely, or at least for the foreseeable future. But it's just kind of annoying to me as somebody who really likes single player games that it feels like Sony is willing to take like all the chances in the world on shit like this. But for a lot of their single player, kind of wackier, more experimental games, they like shut down all of these studios that like would do all that stuff. You know, you have PlayStation London studio, specifically you had Japan studio, and they just kind of want to focus on like these big, huge games with monstrous budgets. I mean, when Insomniac Studios was hacked and a bunch of data leaked, you know, a lot of games budgets came out, and like Spider-Man Remastered, a game they gave away alongside like the deluxe edition of Miles Morales during the PS5's launch, cost an absurd amount. Like, I'm like, why did the remaster cost this much to produce? And Spider-Man 2 itself was like absurdly expensive. You know, it kind of makes me question, like, what are we doing here? Especially because, you know, I was going to talk about this motherfucker, didn't you? The last remnant of Sony's longest lasting studio, Japan studio, which put out like a lot of the most like iconic PlayStation games, a lot of the most wacky PlayStation games throughout all of the generations, was Team Asobi. They developed a lot of the Astro games. You know, you had the Playroom on PS4, Playroom VR, and then you had Astro Bot Rescue Mission VR for the PlayStation VR, which was like this really amazing game that like people were like, wow, this is a reason to buy the PlayStation VR. And then you had Astro's Playroom bundled in with the PS5. And like, I remember playing that and was just shocked. I'm just like, this is so smooth and just so cute and fun and just enjoyable. It just feels right. And they let them make just this standalone Astro Bot game. And everybody is pretty much in agreement that this game is just lovely. It's not breaking any boundaries. It's not like setting any milestones other than just being like a damn fun video game. That's the whole thing with Astro Bot. Like, it's just fun. It makes you feel like a kid again, and it references all of these classic PlayStation games. It makes me really sad that the PlayStation brand doesn't seem to care as much about the PlayStation legacy as this fucking game does. But you can tell this game wasn't made with like a $200 million budget. It's just meant to be like a really good 3D platforming game, and I just really want Sony to just be able to like put out stuff like this from time to time, you know, like maybe like once a year or something. I don't know. It doesn't have to be a 3D platformer. It can be like any genre, just something other than a live service game or something that's like a third person serious narrative adventure with the behind the shoulder camera that all of their games after like 2017 started to do. I love those games, but like, yeah, I do look back at like the PS3 generation with just the sheer variety Sony put out on that platform. I'm just like, yeah, why can't we get like another Little Big Planet? Why not another God of War that's kind of like a throwback to the original series that's more of like a hack and slash? Or hell, if God of War you want to specifically take in like the God of War 2018 direction, which is perfectly fine because like, you know, like it's a really good direction, you know, why not bring back like Heavenly Sword, which was kind of God of War like in of itself? Hell, I would love to see a return of like Killzone, Resistance, I don't know. But I guess Sony's strategy to kind of like bring more variety into the lineup is to work with outside developers and publish third-party games, or at least like reach exclusivity agreements. So, you know, we had Stellar Blade, Rise of the Ronin, both in 2024, and then you also had Deathloop. That was kind of a big one that released in like 2021. Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, you know, those were PlayStation timed exclusives, and these are all good games. Like, that's just the thing. It's to the point where I don't think you can really say, oh my god, the PS5 generation just is the worst. It sucks. I look back at the stack of games that I've accumulated and played, and I look at it like, no, there's a lot of stuff to play on this platform. There is just a barrage of great stuff to play. We are in no short supply of that. And a lot of the stuff that Sony is putting out themselves is good. It's high quality. They are good games. But what I've been trying to get at this whole time is just the lack of feeling of just excitement around it all. I understand why they're doing what they're doing, but it just kind of feels like it's just like there's really no connection I have to my PS5 like I did with like my PS4 or PS3. It isn't true that Sony doesn't care, but I genuinely do kind of feel like it feels like they don't really care sometimes. They're just like, f it, you own a PS5, you'll buy our good games. Why do we care? Xbox is over there in the corner pissing in their palms, so it's just like, why do we really care about like impressing you with anything? We're gonna put out the stuff that works. You know, we're going to impress you with the fact that the games are good and good quality, and you're gonna buy them, you're gonna enjoy them. That's it. Suck it up. And to strengthen our lineup, we're just gonna work with certain third parties, make exclusive games that way. You know, maybe they'll be exclusive for a while, exclusive for like a year. Who cares? So in the end, like, that's why I just don't really feel like a ton of excitement surrounding the PlayStation 5 It's not because it's a bad console at all. Not at all. I mean, like, I love the controller. I love how, you know, fast and snappy the UI is. I have, like, problems with it. You know, I don't think it's, like, perfect, but, you know, I love how smooth everything feels. Sony hasn't really put out any, like, major bad games on the PS5. Even something like Concord, as much as people like to, like, just piss all over that game, and justifiably so, but, like, it's not like it's, like, a poorly made game. It's just kind of, like, whatever. But it just kind of feels like we've been kind of seeing the effects of, like, how video game development was kind of, like, paused in 2020, how a lot of the industry had to like scramble to figure things out, because like for like 2022 through 2024, it does kind of feel like, oh man, like what's going on here? There's not a lot coming out from like a lot of studios. You know, Sony had to go into 2024 pretty much saying like, we're not going to release any like major franchise releases this year. And 2023, you already barely had anything. You had like the PlayStation VR 2, which, that's a whole other thing, and Spider-Man 2, and that was it. And I think that was a pretty, like, garbage year overall. Like, I love Spider-Man 2, but, like I said, like, it's honestly not that exciting. But yeah, the PlayStation VR 2. That was a thing, wasn't it? It's just like, what happened there, man? For like PlayStation to be like so like careful around like, oh man, we don't want to take a ton of risks here, to then like put out the PlayStation VR 2 in like the dumbest way possible. It's just, I don't understand. Like, why are they focusing so much on VR? Again, it's like the live service thing. Like, they're trying to reach for something that just isn't gonna really happen most of the time. And when you have something, just run with it, man. You have Helldivers 2, that works great. But no, they're probably gonna keep on trying. And then the PlayStation VR worked pretty well, but it kind of felt like they just kind of put the PSVR 2 into production without like really like giving a shit about making games for it, or like marketing the thing, or putting it out at like a decent damn price. It's more expensive than the damn console itself. And like, yeah, like the only game that really released for it that Sony put out was like the Horizon VR game. That was it. And then after the fact that it like wasn't much of a success, Sony just gave up on it. Like, in my opinion, I think VR is a cute novelty, and I think the original PSVR for the PS4 kind of like leaned into that a lot, you know? Like, it was a bit expensive, but like it was less expensive than other VR headsets, and hey, it already worked for your PS4, so good stuff. And on top of that, there was actual support for the damn thing. Like, there was a decent selection of games to pick up for your PSVR. The PSVR 2, they just go like hog wild with like an insane price point, no game support, and I feel like at this point, most people have experienced VR and they know if it's something that like, oh, I really want to invest more into this, or like, oh, that was kind of cool to try out. I'm good for the rest of my life though. So again, like, Sony's willing to invest in that, but not Sly Cooper. Then you have like the PS5 Pro that just kind of feels like, yeah, you know, like it enhances the games. At that price point, I don't give a damn. I think the main thing is like the PS5 doesn't even feel like it's reached any kind of potential. Like, it feels like nobody's really like actually dug into the PS5 and made a game solely for the PS5, take advantage of all of the hardware or anything like that. It doesn't feel like it's happened. So you're telling me we're going for a $700 PS5 Pro? Like, the PS4 Pro was at like $400 when it launched, and then the original PS4 was dropped in price. Of course, I understand, you know, the economy. Things are different now, I get it, but still, like, it is kind of like, what are we doing here, buddy? I just feel like Sony's been on like repeat since like 2017 or something. What are the games you're releasing? Oh, more Horizon, more God of War, more Spider-Man. We're gonna do another PlayStation VR. We're gonna do another PlayStation Pro console. We're gonna do a slim console. And like, yeah, to an extent, like a lot of video game companies are like that, but like there's a little bit more variety, man. Come on. But you know what? I will say this. Sony's PlayStation Plus changes, you know, they have the PlayStation Plus game catalog. Hey, like, that's not bad. I don't understand why a lot of people compare it unfavorably to Xbox Game Pass. Because I gotta be honest, like, there's so many good quality games in the PlayStation Plus catalog. And you also have like a lot more like retro classic games. You know, Sony's been actually kind of getting a lot better with putting out like old PS1 games, PS2 games, PSP games, on the PS5 and also PS4. You know, in addition, like there's so many like actual quality like PS4 and PS5 games available on there that I'm like, damn, like I don't understand why a lot of people are like being like, oh man, this is fine, but it ain't no Game Pass. I'm like, why not? It is pretty much very similar to Game Pass, and like I think it is pretty comparable in quality. I think the only problem is most people know about Game Pass at this point. I don't think as many people know about the selection on PlayStation Plus. They just got to get PS3 games over, man. I saw that they put out like Tekken 6 on the PlayStation Plus game catalog, but it was the PSP version. And that game has bad reviews on the PlayStation Store just because it's just like, why wouldn't it? Everybody looks at Tekken 6 and they immediately think, oh my god, yeah, Tekken 6, and they download it, and it's the PSP version. So, I mean, that's nice. You know, I do really enjoy the DualSense controller. I think it feels really nice. Battery life is garbage, and I do have the DualSense Edge, which is like a $200 version of the controller. That's not worth it in my opinion at all. I have no desire for a PS5 Pro, especially considering like they do the whole like, oh, it's a digital only model. If you want the physical thing, then you have to get the disc drive attachment. I get why they're doing that, because they don't want to have like two different SKUs of an incredibly niche product. Like they know like this is like $700. Most people are not going to buy this. And I will say, like, I do like the change they did to the PS5 with the PS5 Slim. I really like that the digital edition can upgrade to a physical one with the disc drive attachment. I think it's pretty dumb, the fact that you have to connect online to attach the disc drive. I think that's garbage. I get it, because like they want to, you know, confirm that you're using like a Sony made disc drive, so then you can't like whatever, find some way to bootleg games or whatever. But either way, I like that they give you the option. If you have a digital only PS5, you can upgrade that to a physical edition PS5. But the fact that the PS5 Pro is digital only out the bat, I think is pretty stupid. I mean, like, this is an enthusiast's product, you know? So you're telling me that like somebody who wants a PS5 Pro isn't gonna want like a disc drive with that, and it already costs $700, and like there's no disc drive included? Like, that's stupid. That's dumb. And it just feels like it's all like them trying to move towards digital only, digital only. It feels like they're really only thinking about things in the short term. I understand where we're at in the industry and like how entertainment works now is primarily digital only, you know? I walked into a Meijer the other day and like they got rid of all their DVDs, and I'm like, fair enough, I haven't bought a DVD from you in years, but still. I feel like focusing so much on like digital only stuff, subscription services, like I just feel like I feel like we're gonna get to a breaking point at some point. I think a lot of people are already getting a little fed up with things, and I don't think it's completely impossible that we're moving towards a point where things are just gonna kind of reset. I mean, Disney Plus is putting out like TV channels now where you can just go to it and like be like, oh yeah, it'll just play stuff without me having to select anything. How convenient. That's just fucking cable. In the long term, I think it's good to have like physical options with these things. Even if you're like digital only all the way, I mean, like, hell, they can incentivize you to only buy digital games if they really want to. They can make the digital games like $5 less expensive. I don't know, just do something to incentivize people to buy digital only. Maybe you get it like 5 days early, whatever. Just keep a physical option there. Like, dear God, keep a physical option. I just think it's really important, and companies like Sony and Microsoft obviously are moving away from giving a shit. But yeah, my overall thoughts on the PS5 thus far, it's fine. Living through this generation, it's not that exciting. I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you. It was like damn awesome, like in 2020 when Sony held their big PS5 reveal event, and it just kind of felt like they were just throwing like game after game after game, all these games that we really wanted to see, just really exciting to see, like Miles Morales, Sackboy, Demon's Souls, showed off Horizon Forbidden West, and I don't really think we've really reached that moment since then. And all of Sony's like PlayStation showcases and state of play presentations, I mean, they've kind of gotten better throughout the years, but also kind of not. Like, the only one I can really remember that was like really damn good was like the state of play that showed off Final Fantasy VII Remake for the first time in like a while. That was the only one I remember that was worth a damn. Maybe also the one that showed off like the Resident Evil 4 remake. I mean, that was pretty good, but even then, like, I kind of caught the TLDR after that one came out. You know, the showcase that I did watch was like the worst damn one. It was like the 2023 showcase, and like, oh my god, that was the biggest waste of time of my life. It just kind of makes me look back at like the PS4 generation, and like Sony did such a good job hyping their fans up. Like, remember like PSX, the PlayStation Experience, when they would do that like every December, and like in like 2016, that was incredible. That was like this unbelievable event. That's where they showed off like Last of Us Part 2 for the very first time, and it was like, oh my god. And they did a lot of franchise care during that too. I mean, like, they showed off the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. They showed off like the Wipeout Omega Collection. They also revealed like Uncharted The Lost Legacy. Just so much stuff that I'm just like, oh my god. Like, man, I do miss that era. But you know, I mean, like, I kind of look at the PS5 and I'm like, you know, hopefully we kind of get a little closer to that, you know, in the latter half of its life. But you know, right now it does kind of feel like Sony is like this faceless entity. You know, back in like 2016, like, you had more prominent figureheads, you had more prominent faces that were, you know, kind of like you could kind of relate to, or just fans could kind of look forward to seeing. You know, it's kind of like when Nintendo had Reggie and Iwata, and you know, like you look forward to that. And Nintendo still has like faces. You know, I believe Shinya Takahashi hosts the Nintendo Directs these days. And you know, he seems like such a nice fella. But you know, it's kind of hard to you know, come back from like Reggie or Iwata and whatnot. And Xbox has, you know, Phil Spencer and Matt Booty, but it's like, who cares at the end of the day? I kind of feel like a lot of these companies would rather shift to like a pretty like, we're just a faceless company kind of deal. And it's a little sad. You know, I really do value my parasocial relationships with giant corporate figureheads. But yeah, overall the PS5, it's not as bad as I think it kind of feels like it is sometimes. Like, there's a lot of games to play on here. There's a lot of great games. There's some of the greatest games of all time, and the fact that you can play all PS4 games, well, I mean, most PS4 games. I almost forgot Hitman Go Definitive Edition isn't compatible with the PS5. I like how games look, I like how games feel on the console, I like the controller a lot, and I'm still hopeful for the future. I feel like we're still gonna get some pretty solid kind of generation-defining moments. And, you know, we've had that so far. You know, I think it's just kind of easy to take for granted how good we have it right now. But, you know, I don't think that takes away from kind of the BS going on as well. But yeah, I like the PS5. I just don't really care that much right now. But hopefully that changes. But either way, it can't get much worse than this. Oh boy, the Xbox Series X. Who gives a shit? You know, I was thinking, the Xbox Series X is like the perfect console for somebody who just doesn't fucking care, which is pretty crazy because I've already just said, like, I like the PS5, but I don't care. I also, you know, I like the Xbox Series X, and I really don't care. But I mainly say that because, like, they are so focused on Game Pass with Xbox right now. And, you know, I've always enjoyed Game Pass throughout the years, but especially after I did my budget gaming episode of Scott the Woz, I have kind of realized, like, it's not as good of a deal as it really seems like it is, especially considering, like, there are a couple months here and there where I'm not using Game Pass. I'm not doing anything with it. But then recently, like, I downloaded, like, Mafia Definitive Edition on it because it was available, and I've always wanted to play Mafia Definitive Edition. It looked like such an amazing, like, remake of an old school, like, 6th generation game back on the PS2 and original Xbox, and I'm like, wow, they really, like, just went to town on this remake. It looks like a brand new ass game. And, you know, I played a couple hours of it, and I'm like, man, I'm really enjoying this. And like, damn, thank God for Game Pass. When in reality, it's kind of like, okay, like what? I paid like $100+ of Game Pass this year. I played one good game within the past couple of months that I'm like, damn, Game Pass is such a great deal. when I could have just bought the game for $20. A Game Pass is only a great deal if you're really like playing a bunch of stuff on it. And I gotta be honest, it does kind of seem like Microsoft has hit a cap when it comes to how many people they can get to subscribe to Game Pass. And it kind of makes sense because it's like, okay, well, Game Pass is kind of just on Xbox and PC right now. Maybe once everybody's ecosystem is opened up a little more and, you know, you can start to see like Xbox Game Pass on like Nintendo's consoles and Sony's consoles and whatever, all this other stuff, maybe, sure. But as it stands, I don't really know what they can do to make you really jump into Game Pass if you aren't already subscribed to Game Pass. I feel like at this point, if Game Pass is a genuine option for you and you have the choice to buy it or not, and you haven't already, you're probably one of these people that like, I don't want another subscription service. I'm not gonna use it. But Microsoft added Call of Duty Black Ops 6 to Game Pass, so you know, that's a big ass deal. But you know, like, is that really gonna move the needle much? It's less expensive for like a month or two of Game Pass, but like, I don't know, man. I mean, like, if you're really interested in Call of Duty, I feel like you're gonna download Call of Duty, and then there's all these other games on Game Pass that you don't give a damn about. And I feel like at this point, Microsoft is more focused on like adding to Game Pass and just kind of like tweaking that to make it as profitable as possible and add as much value as possible to it, instead of actually making some goddamn games for the Xbox. My lord, I have no idea what the problem with Xbox has been since like 2019. And even then, like, the problem goes back further throughout the Xbox One generation. Microsoft's first-party output has been abysmal for like a decade plus at this point. Have they put out good games? Yes, and they've published like some amazing games. They've gotten some great exclusives, especially in the Xbox One era. You know, Cuphead was exclusive. I remember like Inside was exclusive. I mean, those are two indie games, but those are two of like some of the greatest indie games ever created. You know, there was Pentiment, which is a very kind of like, you know, you got to be into that kind of game to really like, yeah, this is your kind of game. But you know, that was an Xbox Series X generation digital release by Obsidian, and you know, that was a great game. You also have Hi-Fi Rush, which is like phenomenal, and that was like, oh my god, yes, it was like shadow dropped, it was revealed and released on Game Pass immediately after, and Microsoft didn't give a shit. This damn company is so back and forth when it comes to like, oh my god, they did a cool thing here, and then 6 months later, they do the most ass-backwards garbage that I've ever seen in my life. Like, the only major win that the Xbox brand has had this generation, I would say, is probably Hi-Fi Rush. You know, it's not gonna be like this 10+ million seller blockbuster franchise or anything, but it was a well-loved title with so much personality, such a unique gameplay style. Yeah, it was fantastic. And then Microsoft shut down the studio that developed it, probably just because of logistics. After they purchased Activision Blizzard, they had to pay for so much there. They looked at all of their development teams and they saw that like Tango Gameworks, who makes Hi-Fi Rush, they were probably like the furthest away from releasing like a brand new game. So they were like, it's going to take a while for this company to really make us more money, so we're just going to shut them down. And thank God that company was revived later down the line, but it shouldn't have had to come to that point. And there's so many games that Microsoft has announced for the Xbox Series X that, like, we haven't heard about them in years. And they're also games that I'm kind of like, I don't really know what there is to look forward to with these games. What, it was like Contraband? It's made by like the Just Cause developers? I just remember seeing like a CGI trailer for that during like one of their showcases years ago at this point. And that's it. State of Decay 3? I don't understand why that game like got announced in like 2020 and then we still haven't gotten anything from that game other than like another CGI trailer. It's just something is wrong with the Xbox Studios just development cycles, you know? There is something wrong. I do think there needs to be a shakeup, and I constantly read articles and just see news updates that like, oh yeah, they're shaking things up. They're shaking things up again. They're shaking things up again. Things are looking good for the future of Xbox. And then literally like a week later, Armageddon happens. First up, I kind of want to talk about this. It kind of feels like the only major like first-party Xbox releases over the past couple of years have all been like through Bethesda. You know, Microsoft purchased Bethesda back in like 2021 at this point. And like so many of Xbox's presentations are just honestly kind of bogged down by like, oh my God, Fallout 76 updates, Elder Scrolls Online updates. Pretty much like they just kind of like inherited all the garbage from like Bethesda's E3 presentations. But it's like Hi-Fi Rush, that was a Bethesda thing. Starfield, that was a Bethesda thing. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, that's Bethesda as well. And then you also have Redfall, which came out just, it's Redfall. I think it's pretty crazy that Redfall came out in the state that it did. And Xbox did say that they were kind of expecting it to be more of like a 7 out of 10 game. It just kind of shows me, it's just like, I don't think they know how to run video game companies. I don't know. You know, it's pretty sad that like all of the acquisitions Microsoft has made over the past few years, the good ones, the ones that actually turned out well, were games that they had to release for other platforms. You know, the Bethesda games Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, those before Microsoft acquired Bethesda, those were already locked in as timed PS5 exclusives. Psychonauts 2 by Double Fine, that was already promised for other platforms. And of course, you do have Call of Duty, which Microsoft can't make exclusive to Xbox. Like, they have to keep releasing that on PlayStation. And like, at the end of the day, like, does it really matter that much? As long as Xbox is getting games, you know, like, that's all that really matters. And like, yeah, to an extent, but like when Sony has the PlayStation 5 and it has pretty much all the games that, you know, Xbox has, and in addition you have like all the backwards compatible games on PS4, you have all of the PlayStation exclusive games, and also at this point, if you're buying a video game console, it's kind of mostly down to like what your friends have. You know, if your friends have a PS5, you want to play online multiplayer with them. You know, yes, there's crossplay, you know, with a lot of games, but you know, for the most part, you know, why even play with fire with that? Just get the same console as your friends. And you know, at this point, it just doesn't really feel like there's any reason to buy an Xbox, especially considering the actual exclusives for the Xbox are just nothing, bro. In 2024, we got Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Which the original Hellblade was like such a cool release, you know, like there really isn't many other games like that. You know, Senua has psychosis and hears voices all around her. And, you know, if you play that game with headphones, it really puts you in like her shoes, and it's just such a unique experience. And I think a big element of Hellblade 1 was the fact that it was like, it looked really good, but you know, like it was still like an indie game. You know, Ninja Theory developed that by themselves, and you know, like it still kind of looked like it was like a genuine like big budget game, when it probably had kind of like, you know, a lower budget. Now, I don't know that for a fact, but still. And I think the gameplay itself in Hellblade was always like, it was fine. It did the job, but it just wasn't like the main hook of the game. I think the main hook was kind of the way it was telling a story, you know, how the game made you, the player, feel, and like how you could actually see, you know, what a character like Senua was going through. Hellblade 2, doesn't hit the same. Just kind of feels like it's more of the same, which I'm like, Hellblade 1 kind of did that just fine, and this one just feels like they upped like the graphical capabilities a lot more, so the game looks incredible, but it's also like, you're not really doing much. It is genuinely kind of like a walking simulator. Nah, that's not true, but that's just kind of how it felt to me at the end of the day. Especially considering the fact that like, well, we waited like 4.5, 5 years for this game. It was the first game announced for the Xbox Series X at the Game Awards in 2019. And it came out and it's just like this 6-hour long game that's just kind of like, whatever, just another cog in the Game Pass machine. I mean, well, like more Forza, it's always good games, but you know, I mean, like it's Forza, you know it's Forza. Halo Infinite, which, you know, Halo Infinite is a solid game, you know, the gameplay works well. Problem is, they tried to go all in on making it like a live service game, and they didn't know how to do a live service game. That's the main problem. Like, I don't think live service games are necessarily a bad idea. It's the fact that so many of these game companies are trying to do them, and they don't know how to do them. Like, all these games almost always launch with like barely any content, and then they take too long to get any extra content out, and it's just like at the point where it's just like, it's actually like a game that's worth playing, it's too late. Like, I'm already done. I'm tired. I'm not interested. And then you have Starfield, which kind of felt like Microsoft was hoping this was going to be the big break for the Xbox. This is the game we're going to keep exclusive, and it didn't do a damn thing. It's fine. Like, I think it's a little crazy to be like, Starfield is a bad game, but like,
It's obvious that Bethesda, the way they develop their RPGs like this, you know, like they haven't really grown with the times. They haven't really evolved. It's still a fine game, and it still kind of has that Bethesda charm and funk. I think Starfield has a lot of cool ideas, but at the end of the day, they're kind of ideas that have already been done before. Like the idea that, oh man, there's so many planets in Starfield, and it also takes you like 2 billion hours to fly from one point to another. So they just let you fast travel. I'm like, oh, who cares, man? It's a video game. Why are we making this part realistic? Especially when you're just gonna let me fast travel. Like, what's even the point of this? The game just feels very dry. That's my thing with Starfield. It's a very dry feeling game. And it just didn't move the needle like I think Microsoft expected it to as the next big Bethesda Studios RPG. And really, other than that, like, there's not really a ton that, like, has been an Xbox Series X big release. We're still talking about the same games we've been talking about for years at this point. Oh yeah, the Fable reboot. Oh yeah, Perfect Dark. I mean, like, those both look really good. But, I mean, like, it's just the same old, same old. We keep on talking about, oh, that's coming, that's coming, that's coming. And I don't think any of it's going to move the needle at all for the console. Xbox is kind of just a platform service now, much like how Windows is for Microsoft. There's like 1 billion computers out there that run Windows. Microsoft makes some computers themselves, but like, are those really the most popular Windows PCs? No. And I feel like Microsoft is kind of aiming for Xbox to be the same thing, where like, hey, there's going to be Xbox apps on your PlayStation or Nintendo consoles in the future. Maybe other companies can make their own like Xbox consoles, and they come preloaded with the Microsoft software. I'm not saying that's gonna happen, but I'm saying, like, I mean, based on what Microsoft already does, it's not completely out of the question. I mean, they already started to do a thing where like a Fire TV stick comes bundled in with like an Xbox controller because you can access Xbox Game Pass with Xbox Cloud streaming on there. And I think on one hand, like, that direction makes sense to go for, and on the other hand, like, wow, they're really giving up. It feels like they kind of think we can't possibly compete with Sony or Nintendo when it comes to like just a genuine console. But the thing is, like, they have in the past. Microsoft is a far wealthier company than Sony and Nintendo, yet these companies are getting, like, exclusives. They have, like, great exclusive games. Microsoft has, like, a huge library of amazing IP that they just own, that they just don't do anything with. And I'm just like what? You really can't make just the traditional console, like, business structure work for you? Like, Sony and Nintendo have made it incredibly profitable over the years. Microsoft has a ton of IP they could potentially, like, really push on these consoles, make them exclusive, just go for genuine exclusive experiences. The problem is, most of the experiences Microsoft has been putting out through Xbox Game Studios over the past, like, few years have not been worth a damn at all. I think at best, most Xbox Game Studios games are, like, fine, but most of them are completely forgettable. They do nothing, they leave no impact, and at worst, like, they're just bad games. And a lot of their biggest franchises just kind of feel like soulless corporate just entities right now. Like, Halo just kind of there. Like, it's still popular. It's still Halo. It still has a massive fan base, but it's not like how it was back during, like, the Halo 3, Halo Reach days. Gears of War, I don't really think Gears of War 4 or 5 are really, like, bad or anything. But it just kind of feels like, who really cares at this point? Gears of War E-Day looks really interesting. But it's just like, I'm not gonna hold my breath with that game, man. It just feels like Gears of War is another Microsoft franchise that they just kind of keep going, and it's kind of just that constant 3 heavy hitters of, these are the only franchises we really feel confident to consistently put out. It's Halo, Gears of War, and Forza. Forza is probably Microsoft's best franchise right now, which is crazy, but it's like, I mean, Forza is Forza, like I said. Like, Forza Horizon 5 got, like, numerous 10 out of 10s. It was one of the highest rated games of the year, but it's a racing game, Like, it's like, yeah, it can be, like, genuinely considered, like, an amazing game, but it doesn't hit the same as, like, a more traditional, like, single-player experience or something like that. But my point is, Microsoft has the capabilities to genuinely compete with Sony and Nintendo. They've done it in the past. They're smart people over there. I feel like management right now just kind of stinks. Why are these games not coming out? Like, I understand game development is tough and game development takes a while, but it feels like every single Xbox Game Studios title has like this massive like development hell to it. Like every single game Microsoft puts out, I always see like an article saying like development isn't going very well on this. And that can only happen so many times until you kind of have to step back and kind of question like, okay, what's really going on here? This happens all the time across every single company. Like, there's always going to be periods where, like, something isn't progressing well. You could have the best managed team in the world, and, like, there's still going to be an area where, like, oh, yeah, we're struggling a bit here. That makes sense. It just feels like it happens every single time with Xbox games. But outside of exclusives, like, a lot of third-party games kind of just flat out skip the Xbox. Whether it's because like Sony has just bought out exclusivity on it, which is, it's a little silly. You know, I think it's kind of crazy that Sony like buying the exclusivity rights to something like the Final Fantasy games or whatever. Like these Bethesda games, Deathloop and Ghostwire. Like I don't see as many people complaining about that as I saw people complaining about Microsoft doing the same thing for Rise of the Tomb Raider during the Xbox One days. Like Microsoft paid for that game to be a one-year timed exclusive on Xbox consoles. And people were like, that's kind of f***ed up, man. I mean, like that game was going to be multi-platform and you just paid them so then it wouldn't be for a year. And now Sony does that exact thing like literally all the time. I don't really see many people care. And it's primarily probably because not a lot of Xbox players really give a shit about Final Fantasy VII. And that's why, like, a lot of third-party games just end up skipping Xbox, like, when there's really no reason for them to. Or at the very least, like, it takes them a while to actually finally release on the platform. A lot of Square Enix games, you know, a lot of the Japanese RPGs, they just straight up don't do very well on Xbox. So honestly, kind of moving in the direction of like, hey, let's kind of make Xbox more of like a brand, a service kind of thing. Like it makes sense, but I genuinely feel like it only makes sense right now because I don't think Microsoft has tried really that much. I think they look at a lot of stuff like Game Pass. Oh, that'll solve all our problems. And then acquiring all these different companies. Oh, that'll solve all of our problems of getting like good quality exclusive games. Oh, these companies will make us all exclusive games. I feel like instead of just like honing in on the major problem, Microsoft is kind of just throwing money at different areas and being like, we'll buy this and that'll solve it. I'm like, you have great teams already and like you have the capabilities to put out amazing exclusive games. They just haven't done that in a very long time. So instead, let's become the Netflix of games. We have all these amazing IPs, all these great older games. Let's just put them all on a subscription service and bleed money for a few years. Yeah, Game Pass is a cool deal, but at this point, I do kind of feel like PlayStation Plus is offering very similar types of value. And I kind of vibe with the Sony exclusive games, kind of that PlayStation legacy of content, a bit more than the Xbox's legacy of content. And right now, I just don't see really as much excitement around the Xbox brand. I feel like everybody's kind of feeling a little burned, man. Microsoft put out multiple new SKUs of the Xbox Series S and X in 2024, and nobody talked about it. And then like every single Xbox event, all of their presentations, like some of them are okay, but like, man, like they all have the same aftertaste. They all have the same flavor. They always do the same stuff. All the games they show off in these Xbox presentations are just like, they all just blend in, man. It's not even that like the variety isn't there. Like they show off of a variety of different games and different genres and all of that. But a lot of the time, like, they just kind of feel like the scraps. They just kind of feel like the games that like Nintendo doesn't care to show off in the Nintendo Directs, or the games that Sony doesn't really care to show off, you know? I mean, Microsoft has some good stuff in the works, you know? Like a lot of the games that they've shown off, I do genuinely think like, you know, a lot of them will come out good. A lot of them will probably come out and nobody will care. But at the same time, you know, I feel very mixed on the future of Xbox. On one hand, I feel like it could go really good. You know, it could work out. On the other, I feel like it could just crash and burn. And if Microsoft just kind of focused on like advertising their consoles and their events more, you know, pushing their games and just actually like kind of managing their teams a little better, getting games out in a more timely fashion, you know, like putting out more quality games. And hey, you know what? F it. If Sony's buying exclusive games, maybe they should as well. Maybe they should go in that direction, even if they got shit for it during the Rise of the Tomb Raider days. if Sony's gonna do the same thing, screw it. Part of me does miss when it was, Xbox as a traditional console versus PlayStation as a traditional console. That Xbox 360 versus PS3 during like 2010, 2011, 2012, like those were the days. That genuinely felt like, like you could really compare and contrast the two. Right now, like I don't think it's really any contest. Like just get a PS5, man. Get a PS5, get a Nintendo console, get a PC. Just like I think with those three, hell, even just Nintendo and PC, I think you're pretty, like, you're set for a bit. But it's still, at the same time, like, I think PS5 is the console to get out of the two. I like the Xbox Series X. I like using it. I think the controller is boring as hell, but it's functional as all hell. I've said this before, but I do kind of feel like as much as I like the DualSense, I feel like that has the potential to wear on me over time. I'm not going to like it as much as I do now in a couple of years. Whereas the Xbox controller, like I'm like, no matter what, I'm always going to like this controller. It's always going to be a good controller. And I do like using the Xbox, but I don't really care for the user interface as much as I do with the PS5. I just feel like there's more room for it to like stutter and stuff. There's so many times with the Xbox where like I hit A and like nothing happens. And I hit A, I have to wait, and then something happens. Like the user interface kind of like glitches out or just stutters for a bit. I love the backwards compatibility of the Xbox. I love that it plays original Xbox 360 games. But they stopped updating those. Like, they don't do any more of them. They said, like, all right, we've reached the maximum amount of games that we can do this with. The way Xbox backwards compatibility worked on the Xbox One and Series X is, you can put the disc in, and then, it pulls the game from, online servers, and it'll download the game to your system. You still have to use the disc, but, hey, I mean, like, that's a really awesome feature. And Microsoft builds pretty much a new version of the game to play on modern Xbox consoles. And they stopped it because they were like, hey, like we have to go through all these rights holders, we have to do all this stuff so then we can, resell the game again. And, we reach pretty much the maximum amount of games we can do that with. And I'm like, fair enough, it's hard to kind of like get all these old games. And then you realize like the original Halo Combat Evolved isn't backwards compatible on Xbox Series X, and I'm just like, why? Like, I get it, you have the Master Chief Collection, but like that shouldn't affect like the original Halo or Halo 2. Like, why? Like, there are so many games that they could still put out on backwards compatibility for Xbox Series X. Why don't they do it? Whew, okay, well, those are my general thoughts about both of these consoles. Halfway through the 9th generation. Again, I do like both of them. It's easy to kind of get discouraged about them and just kind of, not feel that much excitement. But, I'm hopeful for the future of the PS5. I kind of feel like things are a wash for the Xbox at this point. I think Microsoft is just kind of focusing on the next generation at this point, and just, I feel like they're still trying to figure out what the future of Xbox really looks like. I think they still want to do it, and I think there is a future ahead, but I do think they're kind of struggling with figuring out, like, what are we doing going forward? Are we really going to maintain a lot of these, like, traditional console business practices, or are we going flat out like Xbox is a service? We're going to try and just really focus in on Game Pass, game streaming maybe, and publishing games as Xbox Game Studios, maybe, focusing on Xbox first and then, bringing them to PlayStation and Nintendo later. It kind of feels like they're trying to do everything. I completely forgot to mention how, like, yeah, they are focusing on, like, bringing more games to other consoles. But, not every game, that's kind of like a weird thing with them. I'm kind of like, they have their feet in so many different areas right now that it makes it kind of confusing to follow them as a fan and as an Xbox owner. I don't know what to expect from this console. I don't know what to expect from this company. I don't know if at this point the Xbox Series X is as good as dead, and in like 2 years, they're going to just have a brand new console that they're going to focus on for like 2 years. And then they're going to be like, well, this was a bust. Let's just do something else. I don't know with them. And I don't even think they know. In comparison, I think with Sony, they pretty much know what they're doing at this point. The problem is what they're doing isn't very exciting to me most of the time. Xbox is definitely the wild card here, and Sony is kind of just like, they're just going with the flow. They're just kind of just riding the waves of like, hey, we know you're going to buy a PS5. We know you're going to buy our games. We don't care. Microsoft kind of feels like they've given up and they don't care. But yeah, my overall thoughts on this generation, again, they're just all a bunch of fucking pussies because they don't want to do this again.